What's up, buddies? Hey, it's Concert Buddy. This week's video, I'm going to go back to the 90s and show some records in my collection from the 90s, made in the 90s for people who grew up in the 90s. So cue that lever and stick around. Let's get into it. If you've been watching this channel any length of time, or if you're new to the channel, first, pound that like button, pound that subscribe button, get all that housekeeping out the way. Thank you. All that said, I am a self-admitted fan of 90s music. I kind of came of age, musically speaking, and developing my taste, started finding my own path of music and bands I like of the 90s, kind of coincided with the rise of grunge music, and at the end of the decade, you had like pop, TRL, Total Request Live kind of stuff.
Dumb.
By and large, grew up in the 80s, so I actually have an affinity to 80s and 90s music. All that said, this video is going to focus on some pieces from my collection that were not only released in the 90s, but also pressed to wax in the 90s. And why is that? Kind of a double whammy, if you will, because in the 90s in particular, CDs started to rise to prominence. Record labels found that it was cheaper to mass produce music on CDs, and wax and vinyl was kind of fading out. But there were still some records that were pressed domestically, more so over in Europe and South America and all that kind of stuff. But from a collectability standpoint, I've found trying to go back, put the toothpaste back in the tube to find those records from the 90s, pressed to wax in the 90s, is kind of a treasure hunt, if you will. So I'm doing a decent job of it overall in my collection. I've got a nice little stash. If you saw a previous video that I did of a similar vein, I'll put a link here somewhere. Talked about some first pressings, Pearl Jam 10, Green Day Dookie, those sorts of things. Same thing here. But if you stick around to the end of this video, which I hope you do, I've got a wild card that was made in the 90s that you may not expect me to show in this video. So let's get into it.
Stupid.
All right, so the first record I'm going to talk about is the 1994 mega smash Super Unknown by Soundgarden. Now, at this time, Soundgarden was one of the, call it Mount Rushmore of the grunge band scene between Nirvana, Pearl Jam, these guys, Alice in Chains. There's so many great bands that came out of the Pacific Northwest, and particularly that Seattle area. This is probably the most signature album of Soundgarden's career. So many giant hits that came from this album. I think probably the most notable being Black Hole Sun. My personal favorite is Spoon Man, which is, I think, the 11th or 12th song on the album. I don't think it was released as a single to radio. Now, I could be wrong on that. I can only speak for my market in St. Louis coming up, because I found it to be a B-side that I only found through playing the entire record all the way through. So, 1994, this album comes out. It's pressed on vinyl, but then over the years, there's been different iterations. It's been repressed a couple times. My particular copy is this kind of clear Coke bottle colored vinyl. I would say not a perfect copy. You're seeing a little ring wear here, but in terms of 90s classic albums that you gotta have, this gotta be near the top of the list. Soundgarden, Super Unknown, 1994.
Crazy.
All right, so sticking in 1994, I promise folks this wasn't intentional, is the third album by The Offspring. This is Smash. This also, similar to Super Unknown, was the commercial breakthrough to the mass media and to the masses for this band. Up to this point, they had been on Epitaph label, and, you know, myriads of successes. Again, a band starting out in the 90s, but this one really brought them to prominence. This is actually on the Epitaph label. This was such a giant hit. Bad Habit, Gotta Get Away, Self-Esteem. I mean, literally, like, song by song is just a monster hit, radio hit. If you were anywhere near the alternative rock scene at this time, you couldn't go but a stone's throw without hearing a song from this album. Such a masterful, tremendous album. They followed this one up with Ixnay on the Hombre, which was kind of, you know, mixed reviews. A decent album, but nowhere near as monumental as Smash was in 1994 for The Offspring.
Dangerous.
Now, folks, I promise this wasn't intentional, but this album also 1994. I probably should just call this 1994 pressings at this point, but kidding aside, this is, again, a classic from 9 Inch Nails. This is the Downward Spiral, 1994. Probably the signature, here's a nice gatefold. The probably take-home song from this album is Closer, which, if you've heard it, I won't repeat it, nor will I sing it, but this is actually a promo copy. You can see by the self-affixed parental advisory label. That's kind of cool. I picked this up at a random like comics and trading cards shop in Louisville, I think 2019, when I was down there for the Metallica show. And as you can see, this is in really sublime shape. Now, a little public service announcement. If you're into hunting these original 90s records like I am, this is one that, while aesthetically it looks great, it sounds like caca. Sounds like a big heaper pile of poo-poo. And that's because, again, at this time, this was probably mastered digitally first. It was obviously Trent Reznor on the forefront of using things like Pro Tools and computer-based applications to craft their sound. So this 1994 release on vinyl is not mastered for vinyl, and you can tell it is not good. So if you like this album, in 2017, guest starring, 9 Inch Nails deliberately went and, re-engineered or remastered their back catalog to put on vinyl, and they took it very, very seriously. Credit to the band and credit to Trent Reznor for doing that. This, again, 2017, this sounds terrific. So if you're looking to get this album and you want it to sound good, for morbid curiosity, get you a 94 just to say you did it, right? Kind of like I did. But if you want the best sounding version of this album, I would strongly recommend getting the 2017 reissue, because it is marvelous.
Stinks.
So buddies, if you stuck around till the end, which I hope you did, and hope you do on every video, but we all know that's not true, right?
In one word, would I use dope? Nope.
I had to pull a wild card, and this record barely made it because it was released in 1990. This is obviously the hair metal giants Warrant and their album Cherry Pie. The title track, obviously, is still ringing in my ears from pre-adolescence.
She's my cherry pie. Such a sweet surprise. Tastes so good, make a grown man cry.
Don't hit me with a copyright strike.
Sweet cherry pie, yeah.
Singing, I think this is Bobby Brown, or in the video, I know it was Bobby Brown, who lead singer Janie Lane was dating at the time, a voluptuous lass who, a lot of entendre information or entendre suggestive with the lyrics of this song and what cherry pie really means. I'll let you guys at home figure that out. But I picked this one up a couple years ago. It's very actually hard to find. I know it's been reissued, but as you can see, this beaut is in shrink. Got a nice hype sticker on there and sounds really good. Again, this is kind of that point where bands were going into the studio and purposely recording the old style to tape and putting things earmarked specifically and mastering for vinyl. And I think this was one of those records. So the wild card of this video is Warrant, Cherry Pie, hair metal, shoot me. I love it. I grew up on it. Can't get enough of it. I will say that some of these bands touring today that have survived, obviously Warrant is still out there touring. Janie Lane passed away years ago, but they've got to make house payments like the rest of us. But I will say that some of the bands sound better than others, and you can draw your own conclusions to what that means.
There's no hope with dope.
And buddies, that's it for this video. Thank you for walking down memory lane in these 90s releases. I'm going to keep putting these out from time to time just because, like I said, it's kind of one of the hallmarks of my collecting focus is picking up these 90s records that were released and put on wax in the 90s. So do you guys have any of these albums? Do you have any other albums that are kind of off the beaten path that you wouldn't think came out in the 90s but did sound great or sound like that 9 Inch Nails, sound like a big turd pie? Tell me in the comments below. I love interacting with you guys. I truly do. That's all we got. So buddies, if you get the chance on 90s or any other kind of music, I'll just spin it. See you next time.
Well, well, well. How the turntables...
Well, we out of time.